France has the first right of refusal. All the contracts, big contracts, private and public, French companies have the first right of refusal. And my brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, if you were to go home and run for president, and your first day in office, your chief of staff comes to you and say, oh, by the way, Mr. President, Madam President, before you start, I must read you the do's and don'ts as stipulated by the pact for the continuation of colonization. And your chief of staff reads this to you. What power do you have? This is precisely what our colonizers wanted.
This is the journey to one Africa.
Good evening, my fellow African diaspora. My name is Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori-Quao. I am the African Union Ambassador to the United States of America. Our offices are located on 1640 Wisconsin Avenue, Northwest in Washington, D.C. I am here as your ambassador with two main mandates. The first one is to promote Africa in the Americas. And the second one is to galvanize the African diaspora to participate in the development of Africa. Who are the African diaspora? According to the African Union definition, African diaspora are all people of African descent living outside Africa. The 55 African heads of states understand very clearly that in order for Africa to take its rightful place on the world stage, in order for sustainable development to come to Africa, the African diaspora must be front and center of that conversation. So it is precisely why I'm here to have a conversation with you all, my fellow brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. As you all know, I was appointed by Chairman Zuma, the former chair of the African Union. And currently, our new chair is His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat. He took office 2 years ago. Both of them are also very clear about the need for the African diaspora to participate in the development of Africa. Madam Zuma, on my last conversation with her, she jokingly said, you know, my sister, the African diaspora are a very diverse population. Unfortunately, children of Africa who don't really get along, who don't understand each other, who don't like each other sometimes. But be it as it may, she did have hope that if we continue to engage each other, if we continue to understand each other, maybe, just maybe, we would see enough reason to come together, put aside our differences, and speak with one voice, one continent, one Africa. So that is why I am here. And in order for us to begin to understand each other, in order for us to begin to engage each other in a meaningful conversation, first we must ask ourselves the question, how did we get here? How did Africa end up where Africa is? Allow me to take you to 1884, Berlin Conference. From November of 1884 to February of 1885, our colonizers met to discuss how to make sure that Africa and its children are forever defeated and dominated. Prior to 1884, they were going into Africa in a very haphazard way. They started stealing from each other what they had stolen from the Africans. They were getting ready to have a European war on the African soil. The then Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck, realizing that what was getting ready to happen, called in his sidekick, then King of Belgium, Leopold, and said, we are getting ready to have a problem. Could we please call all the colonizers to come and meet in Berlin, Germany? Let's discuss, let's organize ourselves to see to it that we can effectively loot from the Africans. So it is they met between November of 1884 and 1885 precisely to make sure Africa and its children are forever defeated and dominated. The way they did it is by chopping Africa up into the tiny little economies that we see today. Countries like Burundi, Togo, Djibouti, Central African Republic, Malawi, Mozambique, The list goes on. Pretty much all the African countries that you see today, that was by design. That was to see to it that Africa was forever defeated. That these small economies are economies that cannot survive on their own, or should they survive, they are easy to destabilize at the push of a button. That was 124 years ago. Fast forward 2019, nothing has changed. The jokes say, when they were strategizing and breaking up Africa and drawing these arbitrary boundaries, a husband and wife who were in bed in Malawi, by the time they woke up, the husband was in Zambia and the wife was in Malawi. That's how arbitrary the divisions were. Picture yourself driving from Zambia. You're speaking English. Pretty soon, you're in Angola. You're speaking Portuguese. Pretty soon, you're in the DRC. You're speaking French. Pretty soon, you are in Equatorial Guinea. You're speaking Spanish. Keep moving north. You're now in the southern part of Cameroon. You're speaking English. You go up north, you're speaking French. Soon after that, you are in Nigeria. You're speaking English. It was such an arbitrary process, a process that brought maximum division among people who were once the same. We were powerful kingdoms. The countries of Africa that we know today, prior to 1884, they did not exist as these countries. The countries that we are today are a creation of the colonizers to see to it that we are forever defeated and dominated. To them I say colonizers, mission accomplished, because Berlin Conference remains alive and well. Now, let's assume this world is a boxing game. Even the rules of the game, no. Heavyweights belong to the heavyweights. Middleweights belong to the middleweights. Lightweights belong to the lightweights. You don't take a lightweight boxer or a wannabe boxer and throw them in the same ring with the heavyweight. Well, African countries are not even lightweight boxers. They are wannabe boxers who are being put in the same boxing ring with heavyweights. You see, you got to understand that Burundi has the same sovereignty as China. Central African Republic has the same sovereignty as India. So when it comes to negotiating country to country, little Djibouti will stand next to China. Little Burundi will stand next to India. And when China beats up Djibouti, the world says, Djibouti, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you able to take care of your people? Such a small economy. Its population is growing, but its land mass is not. Djibouti can only do so much. The small economies can only do so much. And even those that have tried to survive, they are so easy to stabilize. Before you know it, there's conflict in those countries. And next thing you know, everything is falling apart. Such is the status of our Africa, ladies and gentlemen. It is so important to me that we understand our Africa from the root cause. So as if Berlin Conference was not enough, when the colonizers were leaving the continent between 1958 and 1961, France did something that was just downright terrible. Made the African leaders sign what they call the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. France made the Francophone countries sign the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. Allow me to highlight a few of the items in the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, and I urge all of you to Google it and read it. And if that does not disgust you, I don't know what will. First, the French said, well, you see, we built a few schools, a few roads, a few hospitals, taught you about the fork and knife and sitting on a table and eating with utensils. We're going to call that the colonial debt. And for that you shall pay to perpetuity. In addition, you will deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the Minister of Finance, the French Minister of Finance. Collectively, the Minister of Finance, the French Minister of Finance will take all your deposits. It was 85% back then. It's now down to about 60. The French minister will invest that money in the French stock exchange under the French name. You may or may not know the returns. Today, France is taking out of Africa, Francophone Africa, over $500 billion. Over $500 billion. We, the Africans, the poor countries, we are giving France over $500 billion a year in, year out. And no one is talking about it. The latest figures are saying for every $14 billion that France takes out of Africa, by the time they finish investing it, they're realizing upwards of $300 billion for every $14 billion. So in actuality, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars year in, year out. Should any of those countries wish to access some of their own money that they deposited with France, they have to submit their own financial reports for the country. And if approved, they can only access up to 20% of that money as a loan at commercial interest rates. Figure that one out. That is our reality. It gets better. They were also told that if you need any military equipment, you can only purchase it from France. Your military can only be trained by France. That France will have military presence in your own country and can invade you without notice should they feel French interests are being violated. Language of instruction shall be French. All your minerals discovered, yet to be discovered, France has the first right of refusal. All the contracts, big contracts, private and public, French companies have the first right of refusal. Now, my brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, if you were to go home and run for president, and your first day in office, your chief of staff comes to you and says, oh, by the way, Mr. President, Madam President, before you start, I must read you the do's and don'ts as stipulated by the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. And your chief of staff reads this to you. What power do you have? This is precisely what our colonizers wanted. To leave us in a position that no matter how hard we try, trying to get a leg up is mission impossible. But in those incidences that we're able to, regardless, because that's who we are as Black people, we're very easy to destabilize. Others might say, but Ambassador, why haven't the African leaders done something about this horrible pact? Well, they have. In the past, it's very well documented. Of the 60-something coups that took place in Africa, 7 of them are documented as having been orchestrated by France, and 7 of those involved an African leader being assassinated during a coup. And those coups were done precisely because those African leaders, those Pan-African leaders, were trying to pull out of the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. Now, there have been other coups that were created by just mercenaries who were running around trying to destabilize African countries, and always because the African countries would have discovered a natural resource. And they created those coups, so while the locals are fighting, thrown into a civil war, they will be siphoning that natural resource. We know the game now. We've seen them play the game. So it's not like there was no attempt to pull back, but the reality is, even now, when leaders have tried to push back on certain issues, next thing you know, there's conflict in that country. And who are they using for the conflict? Us. The people who are going to be toy-toying on the streets, it's us, the Africans. And we are going on the streets fighting somebody else's war because we simply do not know. Let me bring it home, for example. If, let's say, a Francophone African leader decides to pull out of the pact, by the way, they also print the money, the CFA. They print the CFA for all the Francophone African countries. France no longer even use the CFA. But they print it gladly for the African countries. France is using the euro. So if a leader starts wanting to be too smart, all they have to do is stop printing the money. And next thing you know, the locals are getting their paychecks, they're going to the bank, they line up, there is no physical cash. it's that easy to destabilize Africa. Food in most of the Francophone countries, close to 50% in some countries, the food is coming from France. If you start acting like you're too smart, they simply stop sending food. And before you know it, the shelves are empty. And the locals start demonstrating. And they'll be demonstrating and blaming the president. I am not saying our African presidents don't have any blames. Nobody's without blame. No country is perfect. No leader is perfect. I get that. But what I'm saying is, in order for us to make sure when we demonstrate, when we complain, we are complaining about issues that are truly matter to us, not issues that we are being thrown into because somebody else has a different agenda. They're basically throwing a shiny object in one direction, and we run after the shiny object when the real issue is over here. So what I'm talking about is like Africa is like a tree. The problems of Africa, such as youth unemployment, poverty, disease, starvation, those are the leaves on a tree. They're drying up. Today, this country has the problem. Tomorrow is that country. Tomorrow is... Those are the issues. They're leaves. They're going to come and go. The branches, they're going to die, but they'll come back season after another. But until you address the issues of the root, this tree will always be a problem. For Africa, the root has to do with the Berlin Conference. We must be clear that the Berlin Conference is alive and well. A decision that was made 124 years ago remains alive and well today. In addition, after the Berlin Conference, they did something just as deplorable. They set out to let the Africans believe everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. That's the rule of divide and conquer. That's the legacy of colonization. Have you ever wondered why, when you try to go home at the airport, if you travel with our brothers and sisters who happen to be Caucasian, they get better treatment by our own people? I was trying to go through the airport, I won't mention which country in Africa. I called the porter 3 times. The man would come and hang around. The minute I look another way, he's gone. I later found out from one of the porters that, we are looking for the white people because they pay more. My own people are discriminating against me. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. Thanks to the legacy of colonization. Thanks to the rule of divide and conquer. Those are some of our realities. How do you address that? We must understand it. We must realize on an individual basis that we are suffering from this affliction. This affliction that is called the legacy of colonization and the legacy of slavery. Because for true healing to take place, for sustainability to take place, it has to start with the conversation with the image in the mirror. So when it's all said and done, our understanding of what is really going on in Africa, what is really making Africa end up where Africa is where we need to begin. So for today, I ask you to understand the Berlin Conference and its relevance to you today. Its relevance in your family today. Its relevance to your country and to your continent and to the world wherever black people are. So we got 2 issues: the legacy of slavery, the legacy of colonizations, 2 demons that we must fight, 2 afflictions that we must accept that we suffer from, and let's make every effort to defeat those demons within us in order for us to truly represent our Africa with full understanding of the issues. So as we look for a solution, our minds are clear and our minds are in the right place. Allow me to take a moment to then take you to 1963. Our Pan-African leaders realizing that in order for Africa to move forward, Africa must speak with one voice, one continent, one country, one heart, one mind, one soul. So they met in Addis Ababa in 1963, and they created the OAU, Organization of African Unity. It was an attempt to regroup and undo the boundaries that were imposed upon us. Unfortunately, when they went to Addis Ababa, they were still divided. We had the Casablanca group who were Pan-Africanists who says African Union now, Africa for the Africans. But unfortunately, there were only 7 of them. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And the rest of the African countries were the nationalists. They were the Monrovia group. They said, no, let's go slow. They won. We often say, when the Pan-Africanists lost in 1963, Africa lost. 55 years later, we're still going slow. All is not lost, however. Last year, 2018, our leaders came together in Kigali. They agreed on a decision which is now called the African Continental Free Trade Area. This agreement, they are saying we must speak with one voice, we must negotiate with one voice as a bloc, as one Africa, because as Africa, we are a heavyweight and we belong with heavyweight boxers. We belong with the big boys. There is parity there. This is how we begin to destroy the Berlin Conference. And of the 52 heads of states who have signed on to this, we only need 22 ratifications. I'm glad to tell you today that we're sitting at 21 ratifications. We have only one more ratification for the African Continental Free Trade Area to become the law of the continent, and implementation is expected to begin in June of 2019. Now that's how we destroy the Berlin Conference. In addition, they also signed in March of last year the protocols for the free movement of people, where they are saying unanimously, the African heads of states, the children of Africa must live and work wherever they choose. That too is in the process of being ratified. Over 30 heads of states have signed, and I believe we are sitting at about 3 or 4 ratifications. Already, regionally, the leaders are loosening the requirements to get into their countries. A lot of countries now are visa on arrival. There's a lot of good news coming out of your Africa. And I'm here to share with you that we must be part of that change. We must be part of that vibrancy that is Africa. You see, everybody else around the world is strategizing on how to take advantage of this new Africa whose doors are swinging wide open. The only people who are not strategizing to move into your Africa and claim what is rightfully yours are us black people. Why can't we be like the rest of the other diaspora in this world? Ask for the voices of Indian diaspora, loud and clear. Chinese diaspora, loud and clear. Irish diaspora, loud and clear. Mexicans, Jews. But when you ask for the voices of the black people, you might as well go to the graveyard. We are missing in action. This is where we are not only failing ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. We have got to change this. We have got to come together just like other ethnic groups and speak with one voice. We must realize that our sheer survival depends on us coming together and speaking with one voice as, like I would like to say, the beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated, highly adaptable, and totally indestructible Mother Africa's children. You see, we as Africans, as the origin of humanity, the continent, the inheritors of the continent with everything and anything the world needs, we have every reason to stand on top of the highest mountain and proclaim to the world who we are, the indestructible children of Africa. Mother Africa is calling. I have no doubt in my mind that all of you, after having had a serious conversation with the image in the mirror, you are going to come together and with a united voice and in a resounding way, you shall let the world know that the children of Africa are going home. Let's sing the best melody the world has ever heard as we come together, not as 55 African countries, not as 1.27 billion Africans on the continent, not as 400 million blacks around the globe, but as children of one Mother Africa, singing in unison that beautiful melody as we waltz our way across the Atlantic back home to Africa.